Welcome back to Micro Beginnings. Today's subject, white worms. So white worms are a great live feed for just about any aquarium fish. So here you see what the actual white worm culture looks like. We're going to basically spend today talking about how I feed and produce these white worms. Let's get started. The media here, we're looking at coconut coir and a little bit of indoor soil mixture. And the focus of this is what I basically use to feed my culture. And as you can see, bread is the go-to. So this is the first of the two ingredients that I find really works for me when I'm culturing white worms. The second source, or the second part to that equation, is Walter worm culture. This is an expired culture. Basically, the culture is at its end, where it starts to smell really vinegary. It starts to become more liquid. So I find that basically using it as a spread on the bread, similarly like if you're going to make like a butter your bread type situation. So you don't have to soak it completely, but if you can just apply it gently, I find that this helps to kind of sort of break down the bread and make it more readily available to the white worm culture. A lot of this is going to be very repetitive, so I'm just going to fast forward through a lot of the repetitive parts. These are the two components that I find work really well for growing microworms. When I first got started, the gentleman that was helping me start the culture suggested keeping glass on top of the culture. It helps to kind of sort of secure the bread, but it also helps to provide a surface for the white worms to crawl up onto. So it's a great way to harvest, and you'll see a little bit about that later on. This is a second culture. I'm experimenting with duckweed. This culture's substrate is primarily indoor potting soil mix. I'm trying to figure out what to do. I know some of you may have the similar issue with the excess duckweed or frog bit. So this is what I'm trying to figure out, if the worms will actually do anything with it. In this culture, we're going to basically look around to see the health of the culture. I start generally in the middle, just kind of sort of see where the worms are, getting a good idea of what the worms are doing and the size. So start from the middle, work my way out. As I dig, I see that there are worms present. So depending on how much worms there are, I will adjust my feed to that. Another thing to do is to look at the surrounding areas of the culture. So if you find that you have worms above the substrate, like on the walls, or if you find that there's worms on the bottom of the tray, it's a good indicator that there's something wrong. Usually the soil is either too dry or too moist, so you can make the appropriate adjustments. So this culture seems to be doing fairly well. So I'm going to up the ante. Instead of feeding them a single slice, I'm going to give them a slice and a half. So what I'm going to do is going to be similar to what I've done in the past. So a lot of this is going to basically go a lot. This video is going to go a lot quicker if I just fast forward it. So I'm going to do that using the same application of bread and a spread of Walter worm culture. So if you don't have microworm cultures, you can make your own. I've seen some videos where folks have used yogurt with live culture. So basically Greek yogurt or any kind of live culture yogurt. Some folks have also used brewer's yeast. This component that the components of my Walter worm culture is obviously Walter worms, oatmeal, and some yeast, just baker yeast. So if you don't have white worms, you could just basically make some oatmeal, sprinkle some baker yeast in there, and that'll get you the slurry if you like. So this is the third culture. This culture is half indoor and half coconut coir, indoor soil mix and half coconut coir. So again, starting out in the middle, we're just gonna look to see where the worms are. So this culture, very similar to the second culture, seems to be doing fairly well. So instead of doing a single slice, I'm gonna do a slice and a half. So generally speaking, I keep my culture around 65 degrees. Try not to get above 70. So in the wintertime, it could drop down to about 60. So that's kind of sort of the range between 60 to 70 is where I keep my culture. The worms are pretty efficient at getting rid of the bread. Again, you don't want to overfeed them. When you overfeed them, you do get mold in there. What you can simply do is remove the mold bread and replace it with fresh bread. So this is after 2 days. Basically, I kept them in a room at 65 degrees, and voila, you can already see that the worms are starting to take over, consume that bread. Unfortunately, I discovered that the bread had nuts inside of it, and these guys don't particularly like nuts, so we'll see that progression over time. But the worms are there, obviously, and they're kind of sort of consuming as much as they want. So this is a second culture, same thing. My look at that, lots of white worms. So this would be a great time if you were really looking to feed heavy or kind of sort of like start to feed them to your fish. I generally just let them go through the culture near the end of the bread. I kind of that's when I then harvest. This is the weaker of the three culture, but as you can see, there's worms, even though when you initially started, you didn't see any. So this is the fifth day and the final day of this video, uh, and you'll see why. I also culture Daphnia, so you can see that there in the left corner of the screen. If you guys are interested in me showing you how I culture Daphnia, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll try to get that video out to you guys. All right, so this is the culture that has duckweed in it. It's mostly indoor garden soil. So this culture you saw over time, over the 5 days, the worms consumed all the bread. All that's left is pretty much just the nuts. I did not read the label, and it's clear that these guys don't like nuts. So some food for thought. All right, so this is the weaker of the two culture. Let's see how they did. I gave these guys basically a single bread slice. Yep, completely gone. All that's left is the nuts. So again, it doesn't take very much to feed them. So this is the last of the culture. This is actually the perfect time for me to take some of the worms and feed them to my fish. Uh, the best time for that is this situation here. But as you can see, the worms enjoyed the bread with a buttering of Walter worms. But for the most part, this is what I do. There's a variety of other YouTubers that have different techniques. So feel free to leave comments. How do you culture your white worms? What crazy or unique ways have you found that would help you basically culture these guys? Thank you guys for watching.